Saturday morning, December 1st, 2012. Head coach Romeo Crennel and GM Scott Pioli are outside Arrowhead Stadium when Jovan Belcher pulls up. He thanks them for everything the team has done. Then he shoots himself in front of them.
Belcher shot and killed his girlfriend Cassandra Perkins before driving to the team's facility and killing himself Saturday morning.
Less than 30 hours later, the Chiefs ran out for kickoff. How does a league that sells brotherhood decide the schedule can't wait? Jovan Belcher was exactly the kind of player the NFL builds its brotherhood story around. He came out of Maine undrafted in 2009, a program no team had prioritized on draft weekend. The Chiefs signed him as a free agent, the kind of transaction that gets one line on a depth chart and nothing more. And by his second year in Kansas City, he wasn't just surviving the roster cuts. He was starting at inside linebacker. Now, earning that spot as an undrafted free agent means something specific in this league. A training camp rep, a preseason snap, any of it can be taken away the moment the front office decides the draft pick standing right behind you deserves a longer look. But Belcher competed through all of that every single year for 4 straight seasons, and never once gave Kansas City a reason to look anywhere else, playing in every single game across all 4 of those seasons without missing one. In a league where the average career doesn't even reach 3 seasons, that kind of consistency doesn't just make you reliable. It makes you the cornerstone a defensive coordinator builds his entire scheme around. Because week after week, he knows exactly where that piece will be on every single Sunday, no matter what else is falling apart around him. But football was only one side of who he was. While he was anchoring that linebacker spot, Belcher finished his degree in child development and family relations in 3.5 years, ahead of most players still working through a full scholarship clock. He was mentoring a young man through Big Brothers Big Sisters, and back in Maine, he had been part of a program called Male Athletes Against Violence, where athletes sign a pledge in their own handwriting, committing to educate themselves on domestic violence and hold themselves to a standard the people watching them could actually trust. His own handwriting on a pledge against domestic violence. Former teammate Thomas Jones said it plainly. Jovan was my friend. I loved him, and I wish I could have helped him work through the demons. 4 years of perfect attendance, a degree finished early, and his own signature on a pledge against the exact thing that would define his final morning. That is who the league was putting on that field every single Sunday. And that's who he was before they started telling him he was just an accident they could cut whenever they felt like it. But what the Chiefs were doing to him behind those doors had nothing to do with the player his teammates describe.
You miss him, you know? He's a great guy, great teammate.
The wrongful death lawsuit filed by his mother, Cheryl Shepard, documents that GM Scott Pioli and other team officials told Belcher more than once and across multiple conversations that he was just an accident and they would get rid of him. Just an accident. Said repeatedly to a 4-year starter who had never missed a single game in his life. If you've ever poured everything into earning your place and still been made to feel like you were never really supposed to be there, you already understand what that message does to a person over time. The lawsuit calls it a systemic campaign of mental abuse and says it intensified sharply in the weeks around November 18th, 2012, less than 2 weeks before that Saturday morning. And it doesn't stop at the words being directed at him. The filing ties that constant psychological pressure directly to what it calls Belcher's occupational neurological impairments. Meaning the league wasn't just hitting his body, it was using the insecurity of his contract position as a management tool on a player whose brain was already under serious strain. Now, here is where the 2 versions of this story stop matching up. The Chiefs said publicly that Belcher had no significant concussion history.
Did football play a role? I'm sorry.
In him taking his life? What role?
I don't think, no, I think he had a personal situation.
While the lawsuit describes years of untracked, untreated head trauma building quietly underneath that claim. And both of those cannot be true at the same time. So, which do you believe is? A franchise that genuinely never saw it coming, or one that chose not to look because looking would have cost them their starting linebacker? The lawsuit goes even further, arguing that the pressure and the unmanaged trauma together caused or contributed to cause him to become insane. strip the legal language away and look at what that is actually describing. A man with 4 years of perfect attendance, a finished degree, his own signature on a pledge against domestic violence, who came apart completely. Something had to give first. And Shepard's entire case is built around what was given and who kept pulling on it. Shepard's suit says the Chiefs failed to provide Belcher with adequate medical care. Adequate for what, exactly? Nobody in that building answered that question in 2012. 2 years after the game that wouldn't stop, lawyers went back and dug up Belcher. And the reason those lawyers were even there puts everything before it into a completely different light. They weren't the team. They weren't acting on behalf of the league. They were court-appointed attorneys representing Belcher's daughter Zoe, 3 months old when all of this happened, and their entire case was built around protecting her financial future. What they found instead was something no financial filing could have prepared them for. By then, more than a year had already passed since his death. The tissue had suffered severe decomposition on top of the damage from the gunshots. And by every normal medical standard, that examination should have come back inconclusive. But the results told a completely different story. Dr. Piotr Kozlowski examined 7 sections of Belcher's hippocampus, the region of the brain governing memory, learning, and emotion, responsible for how a person makes sense of their own life while they're still living it. All 7 came back with tau protein clumped into neurofibrillary tangles, and not one of those sections came back clean in tissue already compromised by decomposition and physical damage. In his report, Kozlowski wrote that the microscopic findings of neurofibrillary tangles in a young person were fully consistent with the pathological presentation of CTE. An outside reviewer from Mount Sinai examined that same damaged tissue and said he had no reason to question the conclusion. Jovan Belcher was 25 years old when he died. He had CTE at 25, already carrying brain damage more consistent with a player a full decade older, someone who had absorbed contact for twice as long as Belcher ever got the chance to. He spent those 4 seasons on that field absorbing hits, never missing a game, giving the team everything they asked for, and all of it was happening while whatever was building inside his brain kept building without a single person in that organization stopping to check. Now, science cannot tell you CTE caused what happened that morning. That line cannot be drawn, and nobody can draw it honestly. But what it does tell you is this: the franchise that managed every detail of his career for 4 years never ordered the examination that a 3-month-old's lawyers had to commission themselves. The team that depended on him every Sunday never once asked the question those attorneys went looking for on Zoe's behalf. And what they found is why Shepard's lawsuit was never just about money. It was about what the Chiefs knew, what they should have known, and what they chose to never find out. Less than 30 hours after Belcher knelt behind that car in the Arrowhead parking lot, the Chiefs ran out for kickoff. The official statement said the decision to play came after discussions between the league office, head coach, and team captains. That is the institution's version of consent. A list of people in a room deciding the schedule holds, with no doctor present, no grief counselor, no one whose job required them to ask whether a team that had watched a murder-suicide 12 hours earlier was in any condition to take the field. The same league that put that game on the schedule had no public mechanism for pausing it. No mandatory mental health hold, no protocol built for a moment like this. None of that existed. Crennel, the same man who had stood in that parking lot trying to talk Belcher out of pulling the trigger less than a day before, walked onto that sideline and coached the game. His explanation afterward was almost disarmingly plain. That's what we do. We are football players and football coaches, and we play and coach on Sunday. If for no other reason, it takes our mind off our misery for a few hours. So they played. Brandon Seiler stepped into Belcher's spot for the first time in his career. Brady Quinn went 19 for 23 for 201 yards and 2 touchdowns, his first touchdown passes in 3 years. Jamal Charles ran for 127 yards on the ground. And even after losing Derek Johnson, Brandon Flowers, and Abram Elam to injuries during the game itself, Kansas City won 27-21 run, snapping an 8-game losing streak. But here is what the final score could never account for. These were men who had shared a locker room with Belcher, practiced beside him, sat next to him in film sessions for months. And they were being asked to execute a full game plan 12 hours later with no hold, no structured support, and nothing in the NFL rulebook that required anyone to check whether they were okay before that opening kickoff. Quinn said it himself afterward. The emotions of what has taken place will probably hit home for a few guys the next few days. Now, consider what the league had built around these same men before any of this happened. Every NFL team carried a head coach, assistant coaches, a video staff, a strength staff, a nutrition staff, sports psychologists, and sleep consultants for travel schedules. The infrastructure for player performance was meticulous. However, the infrastructure for what happens when a player's brain starts failing when a man who had signed his own name on a pledge against domestic violence starts coming apart at 25 was not underfunded. It didn't exist. Before kickoff, there was a moment of silence for victims of domestic violence in general. No names attached. Afterward, Crennel stood at the podium and offered prayers for both families. So the league didn't go quiet. It said every right thing, right on schedule, and then ran the broadcast exactly as planned. Because for the NFL, the schedule is the product. And everything else, the silence, the prayers, the scripted condolence, was secondary to keeping it on time. So, here is the answer. The NFL didn't choose brotherhood over the schedule that Sunday because, for the league, the schedule is the product and the players are the cost of running it. Cassandra Perkins was 22 years old. She was a mother. Her family never asked for a reckoning. They only asked for her to be remembered as who she was. The league moved past her in 30 hours. If this reporting matters to you, hit super thanks. It's the fastest way to tell me these stories are worth telling. And if you want more stories the league would rather you never heard, subscribe.